All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Riding the Bench Colts podcast, our very first draft episode of the season. So for the very first one, we figure gotta have a special guest, lead analyst at horseshoehuddle.com, co-host of the Locked On Colts podcast, film junkie, draft aficionado, and the author of the Indy Draft Guide that has over 225 write-ups on this year's draft class and how they fit into the Indianapolis Colts. Available for pre-order, by the way. Link in the description of the episode, to be released April 9th. Today we'll be going over just a fraction of what it is that you'll be able to find inside of that book. But without further ado, making his second appearance. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate your time. Zach Hicks, how's it been going, brother?
It's been good, man. Busy draft season, of course. I will say I'm not the sole author of the Indy Draft Guide. That would probably make me lose my mind if I wrote that entire thing on my own.
Okay.
We do have multiple authors that, each position group is divvied up a little bit. I do mostly just the offensive line stuff and then help here and there with other positions. But yeah, it's a fun process and fun getting it out there. And I think this is year 4 of it so far. So going good right now, going good.
Fantastic. Well, of course, as I said, the reason that you specifically are here is because when it comes to the Indianapolis Colts, personally, there is nobody I trust more when it comes to draft stuff. And at this point, I am just starting to give the look. And again, I know that you're already very, very deep in on it. So I want to start on kind of the most talked about position for the Indianapolis Colts going into the draft, because right now you're unable to talk about the draft for the Indianapolis Colts without talking about the tight end position, and more specifically, talking about Tyler Warren. So apologies in advance for what's about to maybe be a long-winded question for you, but I want to let you know where I stand right now and what I've seen from Tyler Warren and kind of stress test my analysis against yours. So what I'm seeing out of Tyler Warren at the moment is a guy that I think has good hands, has a good feel for finding open space and zone coverage, pretty decent runner after the catch, and someone who, at least from the games I've watched, kind of produced on some level as a result of his versatility in terms of where you can line him up in the offense. But the things that I'm not seeing from him that sort of worry me, and this is where I want your insight, I don't see a guy that seems to separate particularly well against man coverage. And that's a couple that kind of a guy that I'm not 100% convinced is the type of athlete that I'm certain makes a day one impact for the Indianapolis Colts. And my question sort of is, well, okay, we know he produced at a very high level, but is that in part due to versatility that may not be able to translate to the NFL because of maybe the higher level of play from the defensive guys?
Yeah, no, it's a very fair question. Because I don't think that he's in that same realm of typical first round tight ends in terms of his athleticism. We look at last year with Brock Bowers, where I don't believe Bowers did any testing last offseason. He definitely didn't test at the combine, but we weren't really concerned about Brock Bowers as an athlete. There was no concerns whatsoever. You could even go back to other draft classes, where like Noah Fant went top 10, Eric Ebron goes top 10, Kyle Pitts goes top 10. There was never any concern with those guys in terms of their athleticism. They were always fantastic athletes. It was more so the other parts of their game, where Tyler Warren's kind of an outlier when it comes to first round tight ends, because I don't think he's that level of athlete that we've seen from the typical guys that go at this position so high. What really separates him, and again, this is where you really get to the projection versus what you see in college, is he is such a ball winner. And it's a hard thing to really like put together, because it's like, a lot of contested catches and a lot of times where it's like 50-50 balls are turned into 70-30, 80-20 balls with him. But I think he just has that innate ability to just, when the ball's in the air, he knows how to go up and get it, and he knows how to win, even if it's not the most open thing in the world. So you really have to project, is this going to still be the case in the NFL? And we've seen in the past, especially with wide receiver, this is more of a conversation with wide receiver typically, where we've seen the guys who, what's the famous one? Hakeem Butler, I think, is the famous one from years ago. Everyone loved Hakeem Butler in college at wide receiver. because of that contested catchability, gets the NFL. It doesn't work out. He has to move to tight end after a couple years. Now he's not really in the NFL. Now, tight end's a little bit of a different position when it comes to that, but you have to really talk yourself into that contested catchability. Will it translate? Will it not translate? Personally, I think there are some translatable aspects of it, but I'm with you in terms of like if we're comparing a Tyler Warren to a Brock Bowers last year, who the Colts missed out on, I don't think he's as safe as a player like Bowers, where Bowers, I think, was going to be a pretty comfortable, productive receiving tight end no matter what. Tyler Warren, I think he's going to be a pretty good blocking tight end for sure. I think he has a good floor as being an adequate receiving tight end in the NFL. But gun to my head, if you're saying like this guy is going to be a top 10 receiving tight end, especially in his rookie year like Bowers was last year. Bowers was number 1 in the NFL.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I don't know if he's going to get there even at all in the NFL. Like he certainly could. I think he has the potential to be like a Jason Witten type of tight end in the NFL. But I don't think it's like such a sure thing, maybe like a Bowers was last offseason.
Yeah, and I know Colton Loveland's another name that's getting tossed around, and I've even seen a couple times people saying, hey, maybe he's the better tight end to Tyler Warren. So in your estimation, how would you say that his skill set compares to that of a Tyler Warren? Like some of the things that we're concerned about with Warren, do those carry over and apply to Loveland, or do you feel it's a completely different type of player?
Yeah, I think the best like stylistic comparison, like please take this stylistically and not in terms of actual ability, because this is a little too much here, but like Tyler Warren plays the game like a Gronk, where Loveland plays the game like a Travis Kelce. You know, in terms of Warren's going to be like the two-way tight end, the blocker and the pass catcher, a little bit of a thicker build. He's going to win with his physicality through his route running and running through defenders, using his hands to push off when, even though it's not supposed to be allowed, but it is allowed for tight ends, you know, the little push offs they do. That's how he wins. Where when you look at a guy like Colston Loveland, it's a lot of a basketball player playing football in terms of, you know, you get the Euro steps, you get the flashy hands, you get the, you know, quick stutters, the stair stepping to create your space. That's kind of what you're getting with a Colston Loveland. And you're not really getting like the high end blocking like I think a Tyler Warren can get to in the NFL. So it's just two very different styles at the tight end position. I understand if people have Loveland higher. I mean, a big thing for me is like when these guys are coming into the college level and you're seeing guys at like 18 years old coming out and producing like Loveland did when he was 18, that's always going to be big for me. Like these guys are basically in their high school bodies coming out into the college level with 20, 21, 22-year-olds and putting together some good film. And Loveland was doing that at 18. He was a good receiving tight end, and then he had to grow as a blocker the last couple of years. So if anyone has Loveland over Warren, I get it. I think I have Warren slightly higher, but yeah, I could totally see Loveland being the higher drafted tight end for sure.
So then question on that, would you say that you have Warren higher as a result of consensus and production, or would you say that his style of play is more your cup of tea than a Colton Loveland?
Yeah, I think just, I guess maybe because my brain just goes so much with what the Colts need and what the Colts want, because so much of what the Colts need is that tight end who allows them to play in 11 personnel to where they can play with just one tight end on the field and defenses can't get a read on what you're doing passing or running with that one tight end on the field. We saw last year, it was like if Mo Alley Cox is on the field, they're going to run the ball. If Drew Ogletree's on the field, they're running the ball. If Kylan Granson's on the field, they probably have to throw because they can't run the ball with Kylan Granson on the field. You know, that's kind of what teams were keying in on last year. So they need a guy who can get out there and just be either or, you know, and I think a guy like a Loveland is perfectly capable of run blocking. Like if that's the pick for the Colts, I think he can be fine as a run blocker and a plus player in the receiving game. But a guy like Tyler Warren really opens up everything that they want to do in terms of running and passing with that tight end position. So I think Warren's just a slightly better fit. And also, I mean, again, just the ball winning. I think it's at such a good level, and just, you know, that it's like Alec Pierce last year. Whenever the Colts needed a big catch thrown up to Alec Pierce, you know, you get a little bit of that with Tyler Warren, especially in like the short to intermediate games. So for me, it's slightly higher, but I don't have either guy as like a blue chip prospect in this class. Sure. I don't have them as like top 10 players I mean, they might end up being like top 15, top 20 players because the draft is not particularly high, like strong in the high end this year. But I don't have them as like blue chip Brock Bowers type prospects by any means.
For sure. Are there any other tight ends that you happen to like that maybe aren't getting talked about? Maybe just like player names and a quick rundown of what they bring to the table.
Yeah, I mean the third tight end is kind of like you have these top two that are going to go in round one, and then
Mm.
the third guy where if the Colts don't get one of these two in round one, it becomes Mason Taylor in round two out of LSU. Not as productive as a Loveland or Warren in college, but only 20 years old, has the NFL bloodlines. Jason Taylor's his father, Zach Thomas is his uncle. That's back to when I was a kid watching football. Those guys were out there, so it's crazy that
Yeah, they're halfway decent players right there.
Yeah, halfway
Yeah.
decent. So good bloodlines there, but
Yeah.
he's kind of like a Loveland in terms of he has that basketball player playing football type of mindset, but I think there's good potential with him as a blocker as well. He's only 20. I think as he gets older and stronger, he'll be a really good run blocker as well. So I think if the Colts are looking for a tight end to where we can just plop him in there on day one as a starter that lets us play in 11 personnel, I think those are the three guys in this draft. After that, you get into more, like Harold Fannin. He was a good blocker in college and very productive as a receiver in college, but his natural playing weight's like 220, and that's just, you could say he's a good blocker in college at that weight, but in the NFL, it's just a different animal. So I don't know. I don't really project him to be a great blocker in the NFL. Then you got like Nebraska's Thomas Fedone, really good run blocker, like legit good run blocker, big guy, but not really a big pass catcher in college. And then you have a couple other guys who, again, they're just more of either or type players. So if the Colts really want to do what they want to do next year in 11 personnel, it's one of those top three guys. And it kind of sucks that they've pigeonholed themselves to where they have to take one of those three guys. But I feel like we're at that point with the team. I mean, their only guys on the roster right now are Drew Ogletree, Will Mallory, Albert O, and I guess Jelani Woods is technically still on the roster.
Technically, he may be. We'll see if we get him past week 3, right?
Yeah, so it's just like they have to take one of these top three guys to be their starting tight end next year. And I hate it, man. Like, I would have signed Tyler Conklin to a low deal and just had an adequate tight end in here so he didn't feel forced at the position, but Chris Ballard does this every offseason. There's always one position that we know he's taking top 50, and tight end, I think, is that this year.
For sure, Matt. You did say, though, that you're not sure if you have any of those guys as blue chip prospects, and you're talking about a first-round pick. You're talking about the 14th overall pick in the draft, right? So I'm curious, when you look at that pick, tight end in need of the Indianapolis Colts, but maybe not the only need that they have, what other positions do you feel like, given the talent available in that range, do you feel like are in play outside of the tight end?
Yeah, so when it comes to blue chip players, especially when it comes to my personal way I scout, but also what I've heard how teams kind of scout in the process, is there's not many blues in a prospect class. Like, we're talking, I think the Colts probably have like 5 to 6 a draft class, maybe 7 in total. So when you're sitting at like 14, you're not really expecting one of those blues to fall to you there. Now, last year, one of their blues did fall to them in Leatu Latu, who fell to them at 15 because he was the first defender on the board. So they were able to just quickly make that pick, and hopefully that turns into the guy that they expect. But you're typically not expecting a blue chip type player there at 14. So you're going to like your next highest position available.
Got it.
But when it comes to blues, the way that I understand it from most teams is if a blue's on the board, for the most part, unless you need a quarterback, you just take the blue regardless of position, because blues are the guys that you are grading as like star potential players, which is not many in a draft class. So regardless of like, we could sit here and say the Colts don't really need a corner right now because they have Ward and Jones and Womack and all that. But if they had, say, Will Johnson from Michigan as a blue type player on their board, you still take him at 14 because that potential is just so much higher. But aside from that, I do think after you get past the blues, you get more into, we have to find this way to marry team need and best player available, So unless it's a blue guy on the board, like you're not going to take a safety that you like at 14 right now when they have Bynum and they have Nick Cross. You're not going to take a corner that you just like in the same tier as a linebacker you like because they need a linebacker right now. So if we're looking at guys who could be there at 14, though, Jahad Campbell's a pretty close to a blue for me, the linebacker out of Alabama. 20-year-old linebacker, can rush off the edge, can play off ball, super athletic. I mean, he'd instantly be one of the more athletic players on the Colts defense. I think he's kind of the missing piece on this defense right here. So I would probably take Jahad Campbell over Tyler Warren even because I just like Campbell more as a prospect.
For sure.
And then you get to some offensive linemen. If Armand Membo somehow falls to 14, he could be a blue for the Colts or for me there as well. Tyler Booker, the guard out of Alabama as well. Not the best athlete, but a physical presence, an imposing player, I think could make sense at 14. So, the whole draft process is so interesting with that, though. Again, like if Blues, you take them no matter what, but once you get past the Blues, you have to marry positional need and best player available. It can never just be BPA like everybody says they want it to be.
Right. And that's such a good point by you because that is always the discussion as to what you do and what's right one year in the draft may be wrong the next year in the draft. So there's really no perfect answer to that type of thing. You mentioned the idea of offensive linemen. Obviously, Will Fry's a guy that is maybe 2 years removed from every Colts fan on planet Earth kind of wanting his head on a stick, right? But then all of a sudden now he's gone and everyone's looking at the offensive line and saying, we have some real issues here. Obviously, Braden Smith for a period of time, whatever it is that he's going through, obviously hope for the best, but he didn't show up to work for quite a period of time. So you look at the right side of the Colts offensive line and there's some uncertainty, but at the same time, a lot of options. In your estimation, do you feel like the hole that people perceive that they have on that right offensive side of the line, I don't know if I just said that right. You get my point, though. You get where I'm going with this. Do you feel it's overblown, or do you feel like someone like me, for example, I think it's quite possible that they have every single player that they need on the offensive line on their roster as currently constructed. Do you kind of feel the same way? Where do you stand on that?
So I think their need on the offensive line is a type of need that you want to go into the draft with. Like the need they have at tight end, you don't want to go into the draft with that kind of need because everyone and their mother knows that you need a legit top 50 at that position. On the offensive line, you're in a position where you could take a guy at 14. You could take a guy in round 2, or whatever their pick is in round 2. 46, I think, is their pick.
They'll
in
trade
round
it.
2. Yeah, you could trade back in that, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You could take one in round 3. You could take one on day 3. Like, I don't think that they necessarily have this high-end need on the offensive line, but there certainly is a need to continue adding depth and talent to that side of the offensive line, because I think as it stands right now, if they went into the season with their offensive line starters being Gonsalves at right guard and Braden Smith at right tackle, that's fine. That can work, that can track, that's perfectly fine, but you need the depth behind them. You need another right guard who can step in if Gonsalves just isn't cutting it at right guard, because it's not a given that he's going to cut it at right guard. He's barely played the position in his life. I think he projects well to it, but you don't want to make the same Danny Pinter mistake that they made years ago when they put Pinter in there. It started, they didn't have a backup plan for him. And then in terms of Braden Smith, you're not going to get a full season from Braden Smith. Even in your most optimistic estimation, maybe you're getting like 13 games out of him. Like, that's probably your most optimistic.
That's a damn shame.
It is. And injuries take their toll, and you don't know what was going on with him mentally last year. Like, it's just a lot of that comes into play here. And then, do you feel good enough about Blake Freeland as the swing tackle? I certainly don't. And I'm not trying to rag on the guy here, but there's a reason why Gonsalves only had to be a tackle last year. And it's because they didn't feel good enough about Freeland as their other tackle on the roster. So I do think they have a need on the offensive line. Add another guard, add another tackle, or if you add a guard early, Gonsalves can just be your swing tackle again this next season. So if you add like a Tyler Booker, for instance, he can just start at right guard, and Gonsalves, it can just be, hey, you're going to keep working to be the right tackle of the future instead of being the starting right guard. So whatever they do addition-wise, they have options, and it doesn't need to be a high-end addition. And I think this is the type of need that you want going into the draft, one where it's like, we just need to add at this position group. It's not like we need a top 50 pick, but a top 50 pick would be fine. That's a normal need, Chris Ballard. I'm letting you know right now. That's a normal one.
Yeah. Well, and traditionally speaking, obviously the Colts have generally, of course, you have misses at every pick, you know what I'm saying? But traditionally they've done pretty well on the offensive line in the mid rounds of the draft. So that there's at least reason to be optimistic. Like, of all the things to worry about with the Indianapolis Colts, for me, the offensive line at the moment, it's just, I don't know if I'm right exactly as much as the next person.
Keep adding for sure. But like, I'm not too concerned about it. As long as they keep adding, though, like make sure there's more bodies there. But I'm not too concerned about
Right,
offensive line.
right. And you know, and we'll see, obviously, because we don't know what's going to happen. But at the same time, is it a Chris Ballard draft without a lineman or two being drafted? I mean,
No.
it's certainly none that I know of. Maybe 1 year since he's been here, he hasn't gone in and dipped in at that position.
Yep.
One position I really feel like we need that maybe isn't being talked about as much is kind of like a third down 2 minute drill type of running back. We went out and we got Khalil Herbert, and a lot of people really excited about that one. For me, though, I do kind of look at him and say, okay, I like what he brings to the table as a runner, but he doesn't exactly bring a different element than Jonathan Taylor. If anything, he could just come in and spell Jonathan Taylor in the same role. I thought one of the biggest things that plagued this offense last year, you know, we don't know if Anthony Richardson would have hit the throws, no disrespect, but is this idea that you didn't really have a guy outside of Tyler Goodson whose hands that you can trust. I mean, Jonathan Taylor, as great of a football player that as he is, he's not the guy ideally that you want in that spot. So my question for you is this: are there any running backs in the draft that you look at that could potentially fill that role? Because it just seems like either they don't see that as a need at all, because I don't see any noise about them dipping into that in free agency, and I thought they would, or maybe there's a decent amount of guys in the draft that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, it's a good running back draft overall. I'm not going to say it's particularly great as like pass catchers because it's a lot of different flavors in this draft, but it is a really good running back class, and the Colts could go so many different routes with it. To first touch on Khalil Herbert, though, I'm completely in agreement with you. Like, I think he's a good competition guy. He can be your third running back this next year. And in a pinch, if you just can't find another running back that you like, he could be an okay backup, like a perfectly fine backup. But he's not like some massive addition to this team or anything like that. I'm in complete agreement there. I do fully expect them to take a running back in like the round 3 to 5 range in this draft. It just makes a lot of sense with where the depth is in this class. And I don't know if they're particularly looking for a pass catcher, but they certainly need, at the very least, they need a Zach Moss replacement or like a guy who can bring the same impact that Zach Moss brought 2 years ago. Because while I'm not like 100% saying like they need a pass catching back, they need something better than what Trey Sermon was last year.
He stunk. And I'll tell you, I will eat crow on that one. I was like, Sermon's going to come in. I like the way he runs. Man, he was bad. He had one game, he had like 19 carries for 16 yards or some shit like that. I may be exaggerating, but good grief.
Yeah, they need something above that. So if they want to go like that route, like a big running back who's maybe not a good pass catcher, but like can just spell Jonathan Taylor and fill in, Damian Martinez from Miami is just a bowling ball runner. But to go to your pass catching argument, if they want to go that route completely, there's a couple guys like Cam Scatabo is a very popular one out of Arizona State. Got them into the playoff last year with his great production, great pass catcher. I think people are so weirdly hot and cold on him. Some people have him really, really high. Other people have him very low. I think that round 3 to 5 range is pretty good for him. And again, if you can get a guy in here who can catch 40 passes and rush for 500 yards as your backup running back, like that's awesome. That's a great backup running back season, I will take that over what we saw from Trey Sermon last year. So you're looking at guys like Scatabo. There's another guy out here, Donovan Edwards from Michigan. I know his rushing ability fell off this past season, but I thought he showed some really good pass catching chops at the Senior Bowl. RJ Harvey from UCF, big time explosive, compact runner who's a good pass catcher as well. So there's a lot of guys in this draft. There's who's the one that Jake really likes? Yarns, I think, from Delaware. Marcus Yarns, I think, or Yarns. I want to say that's his name.
All right.
Jake's a huge fan of him. But yeah, he saw him at the Senior Bowl. Good pass catcher as well. Good pass blocker. Like, there's a lot of running backs. I do expect, again, the Colts to draft a guy in like that 3 to 5 range. That's the sweet spot in this class for a running back.
Gotcha. So let's shift over to linebacker real quick because you touched on Jahad Campbell. And I guess I'm kind of curious because there's so much talk about Lou Anarumo. We call him Smooth Lou over here, by the way. So if you want to hop in on that, feel great. There's a lot of talk about Smooth Lou and the fact that, he tries to get the best out of every single person on the team, and his game plan from week to week, as people discuss, is something that's variable. But at the same time, everyone has tendencies, right? And my question for you is, when you look at what he has wanted out of a linebacker historically, what is the type of linebacker that fits, and which prospects in the draft fit into what we think we can expect out of Lou Anarumo's defense outside of a Jahad Campbell?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look at several factors with the linebackers that he's
Yeah,
been looking at. When you look at like the Jermaine Pratt type guys that he's had, he likes those run and chase, ball hungry type players, and I think that's what Zaire Franklin projects to be very well. Where they're not the best cover guys, they're not these perfect linebackers, but at the end of the day, they're going to get their nose in there in the run game. They're going to punch the ball out and force fumbles. They're going to get their hands on passes. So I think Zaire Franklin does translate well to like that Jermaine Pratt, just be a junkyard dog, go and get the ball for me, and I'll blitz you at times, I'll rush you off the edge at times. Like I'm just gonna let you beat you in several different ways. But I think what they're really missing is the Logan Wilson type, which is that's very cerebral type player, that cover guy, that guy who when I'm disguising, this is the guy that I'm going to rotate late into coverage zones, and he needs to be able to read the routes behind him.
for
He needs to
sure.
be able to have good eyes. He needs to be able to take away what offenses want to do. And luckily, I do think there are a couple guys in this class. Like Jahad Campbell, I think is kind of the best of both worlds. That's why he's a blue chip prospect for me. Like I think he can be a good cover guy, a good rushing guy, a good junkyard dog. Like I think he can be kind of everything. But Carson Schlesinger out of UCLA should be going in like the round 2 to 3 range. Very, very athletic player, great cover guy. And obviously he has that Chris Ballard story that Ballard falls for, former walk-on player that only started this past year, had a fantastic season with
Yep.
UCLA. So I think a guy like Schlesinger makes a ton of sense. I know the Colts are very, very high on him. So we'll see if they take like a Tyler Warren type in round 1 and then they're pigeonholed the linebacker on day 2, then a guy like Schlesinger can make a ton of sense. But there are a few other guys I really like at linebacker as well. Chris Paul out of Ole Miss, or Pooh Paul is actually what he goes by.
All right.
So that should be your first player you look at right there, just because Pooh Paul. It's such a fun, name there. We got Demetrius Knight from South Carolina, a bit older, 25-year-old linebacker, but did some good things in college. Very big, athletic, explosive player. Not really your coverage guy, so maybe you'd have to put Zaire Franklin to be your coverage guy if you get that, which
Tough spot.
yeah, tough spot.
Yeah.
Tough spot. But again, if you want a guy who can just thump in there and get in there and make some plays, I think he's one that works. Barrett Carter from Clemson is another guy who makes some sense. And then here's a random one here that I heard that they liked is Aaron Smith from South Carolina State. And it turned my head because South Carolina State. Obviously, that's where Shaquille Leonard came out of college. And that's why I was like, oh, okay, because they were one of the few teams at his pro day. And I've heard they've been on him all this past season. I don't think he's like a starter type guy, more of like a, special teamer, late day 3 guy. But that's another guy to watch there is Aaron Smith from South Carolina State.
Awesome. Do you have a favorite prospect in this year's draft? Any position on the field, any position in the draft, maybe just the guy that you're geeking out for a little bit as you're watching film?
Oh man, I nerd out too much watching offensive linemen. I get so excited watching O-line. They're just like, to me, that's the position that I feel most comfortable like evaluating, watching, enjoying watching, because they're just involved in every play and they just get their hands on every, like it's just so much fun for me to watch. And the guy for me is Tyler Booker from Alabama. He's going to be a first round pick. I know he didn't test like out of this world or anything, but
he's a bruiser though.
Bruiser, yeah, just a bruiser, just a mauler in the run game. It's funny at the combine, some reporter guy asked him about like, oh, you're known for your run blocking, but your pass blocking is not really what people talk about. And I'm almost sitting there in the back like, no, his pass blocking is great too. It's just that he's mauling dudes in the run game. Like you don't have to look at the passing game, but he was a really fun player. He's one of those players where when you're watching him, you find yourself like cutting a bunch of clips up. You're like, oh my gosh, here's this clip and this one. And I have so many Tyler Booker like files on my computer. And I'm like, all right, delete these here soon. But I don't know if he's a Colts fit because of the athleticism. I know Ballard likes the super athletes, but if the Colts took him, I'd be over the moon. I know like they might have to take him at 14 if they want him. And I know Colts fans would be losing their minds if they took a guard at 14, but right here I'll be pumped. I'll be excited about it. I'll be like, yes, a fun player, and I'll write up so many things on him. He's a blast.
Fantastic. So we're going to change pace just slightly. I want to do some draft predictions from you in the form of like true or false type questions. Okay.
All right.
1, true or false? The Indianapolis Colts will draft an offensive lineman in the first 2 rounds of the draft.
Ooh, see, you're good with this because if you put first 3 rounds, I would say true. First 2, a lot of things have like, so many, I'll say false for now. False as of right now. There's still some moving parts, obviously, before the draft. But as of right now, I'm going to stick with like linebacker and tight end probably in those first 2 rounds. But I do think lineman's certainly on the short list for the first 2 rounds.
True or false? The Colts will draft an edge rusher early in this draft again. You look at Kwity Paye, you look at Samson Ebukam, kind of question marks about their future. Ebukam coming off the Achilles. Do you think they could shock the world again and go early? What early means, up for your interpretation.
I will never count Chris Ballard out when it comes to drafting trenches early in the draft, even though he's not been the best with drafting edge rushers in his career. So it's going to be false for me, but I could totally see him taking an edge because that's just who he is. He believes in investing in the trenches no matter what. And I respect him for it. I think it's the right approach. He's got to, draft those edge rushers a little bit better. But I do think, he certainly could. It's Chris Ballard we're talking about.
All right, and final true false, the Indianapolis Colts will draft a quarterback by round 4.
Ooh, I'll say false on that one too. I think it'll be a little bit later. I could totally see them taking a quarterback in that like 3 to 4 range if there's one they really like. I think of a guy like Quinn Ewers could make some sense because Sarkisian and Steichen run very similar offenses, and I know there is past respect from Steichen in that with that Sarkisian offense there. He really likes how they just operate, and I'm sure he's going to be high on a quarterback that can operate that system. So I could see like a Ewers in that range, in that 3 to 4 range. But outside of that, I don't think there's going to be any quarterback that goes in that range that would intrigue the Colts. So I'll say false. I think they'll go maybe like a little bit later with a guy they like, but I could totally see like a Quinn Ewers in there.
Okay, and then final thing right here. It's kind of a little bit of a game. Hopefully I do a good job explaining what this is. So I need you to rank these 5 Chris Ballard draft picks without knowing which one comes next.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Let's do it.
All right. Number 1, Ben Banogu.
This has to be 5. I mean, there's no, if you put like Quincy Wilson on here, though. Well, they got a pick for Quincy. I'll put Ben Banogu at 5. That has to be 5, I think.
Okay. Number 2, Bernard Raymond.
Oh man. Ooh. Because he's like arguably his best pick. But there's a couple other names I feel like you might be cheeky with and throw them in here. I'll put Ryman at 2. And I'll bet that you're going to sneak in a better like value pick that I'll be fine with putting at 1. I'll put Ryman at 2.
Okay. Jonathan Taylor.
Oh, man. See, for me, I mean, you're getting a star with Taylor, though. I'm going to be so mad if you put Grover on here. I'll put Taylor at 1 just because you're getting a star player with that pick. And at the end of the day, it's about just getting star players. I know it's a running back and people will be like, oh, the value, but getting that star running back, like a legit all-pro talent, I'll put him at number 1.
Kwity Paye.
All right. We're going to do positive or negative with your last one is the real thing I got to test here. I think Paye I'll put at 4 just because it was such a high pick. And he's a solid player, but it was a high pick. It's hard to, he's not a bust, but he's certainly like a letdown type for the pick that he was spent. So I'll put him at 4 there.
And then final one, moment of anticipation. Big Q, Quentin Nelson.
Okay, I feel good with this then. Yeah, Q at 3. Okay, good. My only fear was you were going to put Grover on there. I'm like, man, that's probably his best overall pick is getting that type of talent in round 4. But yeah, Quentin I think is fine at 3. Now, talent-wise, he's going to be a Hall of Famer one day. He's going to be in the Ring of Honor. He's going to have his number retired. So you could make a case for him at 1, obviously, because you got a Hall of Fame player. But, everyone would have made that pick. Quentin Nelson was the obvious pick. So I'll put him at 3. I feel good with that. I didn't make any huge mistakes there.
Right. So number 1, Jonathan Taylor. Number 2, Bernard Raymond. Number 3, Quentin Nelson. 4, Kwity Paye. 5, Ben Banogu. Do you feel like that's a perfect list?
I think it's pretty good. I could always make arguments against myself here. I'm a yapper. I could talk myself in circles, but I think that's good.
Awesome. All right, Zach Hicks, that's all I got for you, dude. I really appreciate your time, and your insight on the draft was really, really helpful for me. I know personally I'm going to be kind of going back and looking and saying, who was he talking about, and kind of help it guide my research. For those of the people watching, of course, do the same thing. This guy knows his stuff. He watches a lot of film, more film than most any of us will ever watch. So it just is what it is. And that's it. That's an episode. My name was Justin. This was Zach Hicks. This was another episode of the Riding Bench Colts podcast. And as always, go Colts.